I got into D&D 3 years ago as a joke. Now it's a big part of my life. I always enjoy playing with friends and having fun for hours, or making quests and writing lore for my players and watching them unravel the story. So I wonder, what is your favorite moment and how did you start? I would love to hear your stories. I found my uncle's 2nd edition D&D books and asked him what they were. His response was, "Between the time when the oceans drank Atlantis and the rise of the sons of Arius, there was an age undreamed of. And unto this, Bob, destined to bear the jeweled crown of Aquilonia upon a troubled brow. It is I, his chronicler, who alone can tell thee of his saga. Let me tell you the days of high adventure." I would later find out this is the intro to Conan the Barbarian. He didn't say Conan, but he did fill my name in its place. Honestly, that's a heck of a way to get started, and it's kind of really getting me chills too. My buddy had this awesome computer game, Baldur's Gate. Ooh, and we used to play for hours. I was like 8 years old. Then I saw a book on the shelves at a grocery store called The Monster Manual with centaurs and dragons on the cover, and I realized it was a book about that game. So I begged my parents for it, and then we'd sit around reading about monsters and pitting them in arena fights against one another, using the rules completely wrong. Then, like 4 to 5 years later, we realized there were more books, and they were intended to let us tell our own Baldur's Gate-style adventures. When I was 9 or 10, I once played with my older brother and his friends. 43-ish years later, and I'm still going strong. I was playing Fallout 4 and vaguely knew that modern role-playing games were based on TTRPGs, so I wanted to try playing the original thing. Poked around for a bit and found Roll20 and started playing. That one episode of Community. Probably gonna get a lot of downvotes for this, but Critical Role. I decided to DM, but I know I'll never be on Matt's level. A couple people actually responded to this person, like this response. Hey, we all need to start somewhere, and not all of us grew up with friends and relatives in the hobby. As with most things, a few people will be on a professional level, and even professional GMs seem a touch less impressive when they do not have a production team behind them. Oh, and we have one more too. I hate gatekeepers trying to make people feel bad for being introduced to a hobby a certain way, especially with how many people have been introduced to the game through actual play series, and what people like CR and D20 have done to bring D&D into the mainstream. They've been on late-night talk shows. They're talked about in the news. WotC has even admitted their sales numbers have had a significant bump tied to when CR and Stranger Things released. Just by the numbers, actual play has gotten D&D into more hands than anything else in the last 20 years. Honestly, doesn't matter where you started, as long as you're enjoying the ride. I started in the mid-80s. A friend of mine had an older friend who played. We went and played one session and I was hooked. I still remember a lot of the details. Hey, if you're in the comments ever, let us know about the details. I started last year after the girl I was dating and her brother wanted to get a group going. I'm a writer and I really like RPGs, so I gave it a shot. Started slow because I had no clue what the roles meant. But by the time I got figured out, we had broken up, and her and her brother, who was also the DM, quit our group. The others wanted to keep the group going and offered me the DM role. I took them up on it and started a homebrew. They're loving it and are always feeding me ideas now. My favorite part is watching their faces light up when I introduce an idea they gave me or a cameo from our original characters from when we started. Never thought I'd be into D&D or be a DM, but I am, and I have an awesome group to lead. My brother's friend told him about D&D when they were in 6th grade, and I was in 4th grade. I made a human fighter and we ran a campaign. D&D in the late 80s. I already knew about the idea of D&D though because of the cartoon. I got to a point in my life where I was beginning to become more perceptive of the world around me, and I realized that I was all alone and I needed to interact with other human beings or else something bad was going to become of me. D&D had been on the rise. I've always liked the fantasy genre, so I thought it would be the perfect thing to do. It's just a shame that I started during the time of forced government shutdowns, but I'm still quite happy with the turn of events. My therapist encouraged me to join a local game store's D&D Adventures League night out just to get out and meet some people. I was in a new city with no pre-existing friends. I don't drink, so I was struggling to meet people in a city where drinking was a primary form of socializing. I was sort of into fantasy growing up, but for some reason I didn't know anyone who played D&D. My nerdy friends played WoW or other online MMOs, not TTRPGs. So I watched some videos and read a lot and eventually gathered up my courage to go one night. I'm glad I went. That night I met a friend who would eventually become my roommate and who I still play with 4 years later. I bought the basic set back in '83 when I was 8 years old and played through AD&D. But once I discovered Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, I faded out of D&D. Played the Baldur's Gate games religiously, but my TTRPG gaming remained solely Warhammer. It wasn't until finishing Baldur's Gate 3 a month ago that I wanted to run another proper D&D game. So this will be my first dive into 5th edition. When 3.5 launched, a friend got really into it and I played a few games. My first full campaign, I was a human fighter obsessed with finding the man who killed my sister, only to fall in love and then find out my fiance's father was the killer and he knew the whole time. Never got to resolve it since the DM moved and I stopped playing TTRPGs. Then, like 2 or 3 years ago, I started playing 5th edition, then Pathfinder, Rogue Trader, or whatever people were interested in running until we all went out separate ways again. Last year, I tried out DMing a full campaign of both 5th edition and Pathfinder 1st edition, and some one-shots. One went on a hiatus and people weren't interested in restarting, and the other fell apart due to scheduling. I miss DMing, but finding players who are interested in the same niche type of game is pretty difficult. Hey, you have access to the internet, and there's a lot of places like Roll20 or even the MrRipper Discord that you can check out to find a group that you can just, I don't know, live with and be happy with. Freshman year, my nerdy friends approached me like they were about to show me something illegal. Then we proceeded to play a 13-hour session of D&D, and I never looked back. I was chatting with my college chemistry lab partner, and we were reminiscing on playing when we were younger. Him D&D and me Pathfinder. And he really wanted to get back into it again. So he got some books and got a group together. He's had to bow out due to grad school and life, but we're still going strong 5 years later. And he pops in every now and then. 5 years, coincidentally being about how long my girlfriend and I have been together after he invited both of us to play D&D. She asked me out after our first session, and I joke about how my socially inept hermit ranger must have been so hot if she asked me out after that. I started playing at the age of 11. My uncle and his friends wanted to try it out. I thought the idea sounded so fun, so my young self joined. Honestly, I'd be surprised if I hadn't. Being so close in age with my uncle, about 4 years apart, we used to run around pretending to be in a fantasy world, looking up armor on Google and making up stories as we go. Funny enough, my first introduction to D&D was a D&D game called Shadow over Mystaria. It was super fun, and it made me curious about what D&D was until I finally decided to be in a game years later. Obviously, being an arcade beat-em-up game versus a TTRPG is very different, but the game definitely immersed my imagination when I was younger. Early mid-90s, when I was 11 or 12, I was in Boy Scouts and I really hated it. I've always been a soft-palmed, bookish Nancy boy. Oh, don't insult yourself or pick on yourself, my guy. I still hate camping, though I've gotten a little more rugged over the years. My fellow scouts were by and large also effete fail-sons. Once we had all slogged out to the damp hellhole that was to be our weekend prison, that's one way to describe it, one of the oldest boys, the 17-year-old nerdlinger named Jeremiah, who everyone looked up to and was the son of the scoutmaster and the only one of us to even get close to Eagle Scout, pulled some things out of his pack. He took all us youngins under his wing in the big tent one night and introduced us to riches beyond our imaginings. 2nd edition AD&D, 80s Metallica, and Queen. We rolled up characters, absolutely the motliest party I ever played in. I was a seafaring Minotaur fighter. My friend Richie, the most cherubic and undersized munchkin of a kid I've ever met, basically played himself. a kleptomaniac kender thief who rode around in my backpack on threat of backstab if I were to try and dislodge him. Our mage, played by a slightly older waifish ginger named Corey, was a blue-haired sea elf glass cannon who could turn into a seal. And to round out the group, the somewhat dangerous-seeming second oldest boy named Logan played a lecherous alcoholic cleric that always tried to bone the female NPCs. Well, you gotta have one of those in the party, I guess. I don't remember much of what happened beyond the fact that around level 5 or so, the mage got killed, and I spent 3 sessions carrying his corpse around trying to find someone to resurrect him, but it certainly made all those sopping wet cold sleepless weekends some of the most fun I'd ever had in my life. After I got up the courage to quit Boy Scouts, I twinned my 2 biggest interests together, and homebrewed an anime TTRPG for Richie and a few other friends that combined all the stuff we were into at the time. Ranma 1/2, Robotech, Guyver, DBZ, etc. into a hodgepodge nonsense improv game that we probably played for a whole year. We eventually drifted apart and I didn't play D&D again except for one game in my early 20s, but my best friends and my wife and I just started playing 5th edition over COVID via Discord, with me DMing, and it's been really awesome getting back into it. This whole story right here actually sounds a lot like something out of Stand By Me. For me, it was pretty simple. I always loved things like fantasy novels, fantasy movies. I played Gauntlet, I played the old school Golden Axe, I played Diablo all my life. I played all of the old school RPGs that were gothic like Stone Keep or even Druid way back on MS-DOS. And then I found out about the movie called Legend with Tom Cruise and Mia Sara. Oh, and of course the legendary Tim Curry's in it too, which obviously helped my interest. But there are 2 versions of it, and you should go and watch both of them if you can get your hands on it. Trust me, they're both excellent in their own way. That said, I started loving D&D even more because my uncle, who I've known for basically all my life, has such a plethora of lore and love for D&D. In fact, he was the one that got me into games like Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior, and he met his wife playing D&D in a basement of all places. So I've always wanted to follow suit and eventually find my wife, which I don't have, in a basement playing D&D, but I never did. But I still loved it. I loved reading the books. I loved reading about Pathfinder. Pathfinder being my favorite little TTRPG out there in the whole world because it's so wild and just stretched, and I just enjoy it. It made me want to play a Dwarven Ranger. Plus, if you want to talk about good novels, go read The Dwarves and its sister series, Legends of the Albay. It's a lot like Lord of the Rings, except without all the filler and quite a bit longer. Hey everyone, Brian Von VA checking in after the vid. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, ring that bell, and tell us in the comments below, how did you get into D&D?